Hello, my name is Emma Sellers, and I have the great pleasure of serving as Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer at PAEA. And I'd like to welcome you to our Examining EDI in PA Education. Today, we are joined by Dr. Skylar Stewart-Clark. Dr. Clark has a wealth of experience in project management, successfully launching and executing major data-driven initiatives in clinical and academic settings. Known for her strong analytical framework and quick problem-solving abilities, she has a proven track record in supporting emerging leaders of color in academic medicine. Her roles as principal faculty member, preceptor, DEI liaison, program director, and division head have highlighted her commitment to advancing student achievement in medical education, addressing racial inequities in clinical training, and closing the achievement gap for students of color through dynamic classroom innovation, curriculum enhancement, and programmatic assessment. Dr. Clark is a recognized leader in transformational programmatic change and operationalizing goals, and is a sought-after conference speaker on innovative teaching frameworks. She is also an avid researcher with a robust academic background. She holds a bachelor and doctorate degree in bioengineering from Louisiana Tech University, and afterward completed a postdoctoral research fellowship in regenerative medicine at the Clemson MUSC Joint Bioengineering Program. She then went on to earn her Master of Physician Assistant Studies from MUSC and has practiced urologic oncology, family medicine, hospital medicine, post-acute care, and psychiatry. Dr. Clark unapologetically dedicates her time to self-care and raising her 4 school-age children while remaining academically active. She is an avid PAEA contributor, serves as an ARC PA site visitor, and is a reviewer for several journals. She currently holds 2 adjunct faculty positions, one at the College of Idaho DMSC program, where she oversees the implementation of science research curriculum for health leaders and PA educators, and one at Frostburg State University, where she supports program assessment, evaluation, and admission through a data-driven analytical framework. So without saying any more, we are greatly privileged to have Dr. Clark join us today as we have a short conversation on the importance of creating inclusive environments for our students. So Dr. Clark, good to see you, and thanks for sharing your brain with us for a little bit. And as always, I know that we are going to have a good time and learn lots of good things. So, Dr. Clark, we are just privileged to have you join us today and look forward to just hearing from you, particularly as we highlight the importance of inclusive environments, work and educational environments. So we know that when individuals work and learn in inclusive environments, they thrive academically and professionally. Why is an inclusive work environment and an inclusive learning environment necessary in PA education and health professions overall?
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a privilege, and I'm so excited about the work that PAEA has done and continues to do along these lines. I think the question that you frame is fascinating to me because it not only looks at the intersection of education, of the healthcare system, it intertwines with what's happening in society and politics and overall culture within the United States. And I think it's really important to frame this conversation and define a couple of terms so that when I'm speaking and we're having the conversation, there's some perspective as to where I'm coming from. And I think primarily when we talk about inclusion, I'm specifically going to refer to race and ethnicity. That doesn't mean that there aren't other identities that do need to be considered, but I think from the work that PAEA has been doing, the experiences that I've had and continue to have, the perspective really is going to be from that lens. And then I think in terms of defining what we mean by inclusion, that's also important. I think we can think about the antithesis of inclusion, which is exclusion, that tends to make people feel unwelcome. And in the context of race and ethnicity, tends to generate feelings of discrimination and racism. So I think that's also an appropriate framework to, to sort of lead with and think about. And I attended a conference about a year and a half ago on diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the keynote speakers was someone by the name of Lily Zhang. And they had such a phenomenal definition of diversity, equity, inclusion in particular, that has just resonated with me and stuck with me since then. And that is that inclusion is when the most marginalized individual or group of individuals within a particular landscape feels included. And basically what they were trying to say is, there are a lot of organizations that look to generate goals for diversity, which is a little easier. It's math, right? Equity, maybe you can look at policies. Inclusion, not so much. And so their perspective really was that, first of all, trying to say we're going to have 20% of our people feel included, or, create some sort of a metric, was really silly to do. But I think more than that, it really pushed forward the human element of it all. That inclusion really is just about how you're treating other people. And so we have to think about the drivers of all of that and really centering the well-being of the individuals at the margins, whether it's one person, whether it's 90% of a group. And I think that for me, again, really changed how I think about and frame some of the challenges that we know exist in PA education. And so in terms of importance, why? I think number one, it's the right thing to do. I just think it's the right thing to do. As educators, we are held to a standard of intellectual honesty. We are held to a standard of providing our students a background on the history of medicine, and where medicine started, and quite frankly, the racist history of medicine. And I think if we are going to move in the direction that many people state that they want to move into, then the right thing to do is to focus on inclusion in health professions education and in the PA profession, more specifically. I think secondly, it is a matter of accountability. And so there are a number of organizations, institutions, hospital systems, especially since the uprising, the social awakening, from 3 or 4 years ago, who have put statements out. They have written papers, they've done presentations, and there has been a lot of communication related to the fact that these places are committed to the principles of inclusion. And so I think that in terms of accountability, it's important for those entities to then put action behind their words. Third, I think that when we think about especially health outcomes, we know that in the United States, maybe 10 to 20% of an individual's outcome of their healthcare is related to the direct care that they get from a physician, from a nurse, from a doctor. So the other 80 to 90% has nothing to do with providing the right hypertension medicine for somebody whose blood pressure is elevated, or providing the right antibiotic for somebody who has an infection. And so then you have to think, well, if only 10 to 20% is what I've been trained to do academically, there are so many other factors and nuances, and that is environmental upbringing, cultural factors, education, social status. And so if we are truly committed to advancing the health of our population in the United States, which we know over the next 25 years is going to be more and more diverse, the minorities will essentially be the majority. Majority of people will be Spanish speaking. Then we need to be attuned in how we govern our programs, how we train our students, how we interact with our patients in such a way that that really is at the core of what we're doing. And so I think in being inclusive, and having individuals as part of the faculty, part of the staff, part of the training programs, in the PA programs, who can provide and fill in the 80 to 90% is really going to be, I think, where we're able to make a difference. We need people that understand that. And then I think the other, my apologies.
No, I'm sitting here taking notes. I'm like, these are so many nuggets. I'm glad
I have
to
a lot to say. It is not obvious. I think the other, again, more on the humanistic end, is that we know that inclusion leads to well-being. And so if we're going to produce clinicians, PAs, who are well, then that also demands a culture of inclusion, right? If we think about from psychology and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very bottom, we need food, water, shelter, clothing. At the middle, not at the top, but it's a building block to get to self-actualization, well-being, and being your best self. People need to be included. And so I think we are both doing a disservice and, quite frankly, being hypocritical if we, on the one hand, say that we're going to train the best PAs, they're going to be amazing, they're going to do these wonderful things, and totally not pay attention to the intricacies related to inclusion. So we have to really consider our communities as they shape how we move forward.
Wow. Yeah, no, wonderful. Like I said, lots of nuggets. I was trying to keep my pen out of view, but I'm sitting here, several things that have come to mind. So, and you hit on the importance of inclusion for all people. I mean, the students, the faculty, the patients, staff. I mean, this is a long-term impact here that we're dealing with. So I appreciate all of the ways that you brought that to light. At PAEA, we do town halls, and we have the pleasure again of working with students to hear some of their lived experiences about their learning environment, from all across our 300 programs. When you think particularly about, again, this learning environment, all of those nuggets that you just gave, the importance of it, what could a positive and inclusive learning environment look like for students? What are some key elements that faculty can take away?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that I, as program director, had in like my first or second week, had a group of students of color come to me in preparation for going on clinical rotations. And they said, Dr. Clark, nobody has listened to us. We don't feel equipped. We don't feel listened to. We don't feel supported. And the program is going to send us to areas that other students have said are simply, quite frankly, racist and unwelcoming. And so that for me was something I was not expecting, I wasn't prepared for. And it really hit me to the core of the responsibility of programs in providing a safe learning environment. And that's just not physically, that's psychological safety. And so I took that opportunity to listen to the students, to take notes. And at that point, because we were so close for them starting rotations, to at least create some support systems and frameworks where they could reach out to the clinical coordinator, the director, myself, depending on the level of assistance that they were in need of, and trying to help them connect with people locally in the community, which was a challenge because this was a very rural, white community that students were going to. But I say all of that to say that having had that experience, when I welcomed the next class of students, one of the things that I made sure that we did before the students even matriculated was to have a day where they came and they started to build community with one another. Prior to even starting PA school, to get to know the faculty, to get to know the staff, to get to know each other as peers. Because I think one of the huge benefits from the student perspective is that PA programs are generally, there are some outliers, but generally they're lockstep programs. And so essentially I made a hypothesis. If I can get everybody who's coming to this program together to start making those connections, to start sharing about their background, sharing about their experiences, sharing about hopes and dreams and challenges, that would provide that cohort or that group at least a core of groundedness that they could go back to, and be able to rely on one another. So I did that. And the other was that for the clinical year, the second group of students that came through actually created a position, a part-time like adjunct faculty position for someone specifically to be a diversity inclusion navigator for students who are on clinical rotations, because most PA programs utilize a disseminated model for rotations. And so it's one thing for the group of the cohort to make relationships, be connected, develop community, and they're all in the same class, and they're in the same classroom from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and for months and months on end. But I definitely noticed, and this is true even for some of our not students who were not of color, really just needed to have to know that there was a lifeline, a safe space, something for some of the concerns, because clinical rotations, there's a lot of unknowns. Students know that there tend to be power dynamics based on the fact that they're PA students, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we add and layer in ethnicity and color and students who have English as a second language. Those students, if they're not adequately supported and the program doesn't signal at the beginning that commitment, can tend to not do very well in PA school, not because of academics, simply because they don't have the right supports in place. And so I think that was one of the big things that worked well for me, and I know the students appreciated it. And then I think the other is that my students knew that if I caught word of something going on that might be a little off kilter, I called everybody to the carpet and reaffirmed, this is what we're about. These are our values. I don't know what's going on, but let's go back to square one. And we are in this, you all are in this together as a cohort. You all are going to be future colleagues. And so that might mean we need additional assistance in working through whatever the conflict was. But I believe that the students knowing my commitment and that I was going to call them to the carpet if need be, also then further reified our commitment to inclusion in the classroom.
Yeah, no, I love the lifeline in and out of the classroom. I got your back, wherever you are. And I think that sometimes students, what we hear, have felt that once they are in that clinical setting, all of this is up to them. The power dynamic, the struggle, how do I, these people are teaching me, I need them. How do I address these things? So critical there. Thinking along the same lines, what could an inclusive environment look like for faculty and staff, of course, where faculty are thriving and not just there ready to go home, but truly thriving and investing in their students and being invested in as professionals?
Great question. And I've had a lot of time to think about this, and generally based on my own experiences as a faculty member and then moving into the higher echelons of academic leadership. And one critical piece is that there is some sort of structure, and in my mind, it is multi-layered. So it is not enough just for the leaders in the organization to be committed and the individuals, right, are not, and the department is not. And so I kind of think about micro level individual interactions and ways to govern those interactions and relationships, and hold people accountable. I think about meso level within the department, policies, procedures, processes that govern those interdependent relationships, and then from the top, at the executive level. And I think that the leadership has to be bought in at all of those levels. Otherwise, there's really not a good way to move forward, where one part is committed and the other two groups have sort of moved off in a different direction. It just doesn't work that way. And then in addition, I think starting to measure inclusion, I would love to do a project on that. I haven't seen it done. Holding to Lily Zhang's definition of the most marginalized in the group feel included. And what does that look like? And I think until we're able to collect some data, we do have anecdotal stories and people calling their friends on the phone, you know, girl, let me tell you what happened to me. I can't believe this. But who is capturing all of that information, evaluating it, and utilizing it to create steps forward? So I really think it's about organizational dynamics. I think other things to consider would be emotional intelligence training. I don't know if it's just me, but I have seen and experienced some things in these spaces from people who are on boards and, you know, they're presidents of organizations, and in some cases really have not developed the emotional intelligence to be able to handle something that probably could be a minor conflict, but it turns into something major. And then it starts to create those divisions, and it starts to create almost this tribalist mentality of you're either with them or you're with me because of, you know, what was said in a meeting or something along those lines. And I think just training in general on conflict resolution, and I don't mean a video where you can fast forward through the entire 1 hour session in 20 minutes and check all the boxes, but it has to be an ongoing commitment to changing the very culture of academic spaces, which are known, you know, in many cases to chew people up and spit them out. And so it has to be multi-layered, multifactorial. There have to be effective processes that when something does happen and somebody reports it, people get called to the carpet, just like I do with my students. Otherwise, we're sending signals that really demonstrate that you're willing to talk the talk, but not walk the walk.
Yep. Something you said at the very beginning, it's, you know, when we think about diversity, you can use numbers, and this part we're dealing with humans. And so just
Yes,
highlighting that ongoing commitment. Your numbers mean nothing if the human element is not there. And again, just going back to Zane's definition, the most marginalized group. I mean, that's sticking with me. Everything you say, I'm thinking that's sticking with me. Love
so
that.
powerful.
Love
Yeah.
that. So, and you started again with this a little bit, but if you could just, as we kind of come to a kind of bring all this together, some immediate and long-term harm. I mean, thinking about the harm done by the lack of inclusion for our faculty, staff, and students. How can you capture that? I know it's a big question to ask.
I can certainly say from my own experiences, I think initially students very excited to get into PA school, right? You've achieved this dream, your parents have supported you, you've made so many concessions and sacrifices. Same with faculty. Leaving clinical practice, I've always dreamed of teaching at a PA program. Sometimes, maybe more than sometimes, I think in many cases, people can be deluded by this illusion of inclusion. It can look to be inclusive, and I will tell you, it's very difficult to suss all of that out in many cases. But I've been in a space where people were very friendly and certainly were not welcoming. And maybe the first week of work, somebody said, okay, how would you like for the students to refer to you? And it's like, well, Dr. Clark. And the person says to me, well, the faculty have decided that using doctor is racist. And I literally had a very similar expression as do you on my face. And then I looked around and I said, the white faculty here decided that using doctor was racist. And I can speak about it with levity right now and I can laugh, but it was truly like, where am I? What is happening? I mean, I was genuinely perplexed. And I even called some of my white friends and said, have you ever heard anything like this? Like, what? And so then immediately that creates that cognitive dissonance where you're trying to figure out what is happening. And you're constantly trying to choose between two truths of, you're a student or a faculty or staff. I'm in this space because I'm committed. I want to be successful. At the same time, I'm not having signals that the people around me want me to be successful. And that's constantly replaying, right? On and on and on, immediately from that time that something happens, and it's ongoing. And so I think those are, kind of the immediate impacts. Sort of, you start gaslighting yourself almost in terms of competency and am I supposed to be here? And I don't know what's happening. And I think long-term, we know, and Susan Lelashore and Howard Straker did a phenomenal presentation at AAPA in Houston this year on the topic of death by discrimination, and went into wonderful detail about the biological, physiologic impacts that discrimination can have in ways that we can measure. You can measure somebody's HDL, right, levels, and see that their cholesterol is at an unhealthy level. You can look at downstream impacts psychologically from people not being on an antidepressant before they started a job or before they started PA school, and now they're dependent on multiple medications just to survive. And that really shouldn't be the case. And at the same time, that's our reality. And so I think, additionally, going back to what I talked about at the beginning, the lack of inclusion from a population health standpoint also then has trickle-down impacts across so many aspects of society that it's something we really have to pay attention to and be intentional about.
I'm not left speechless much, but you got me. So thank you so much. So again, particularly this last part, we think about yes, you highlight the immediate effects, and the long-term harm to the person. Again, just remembering this human aspect to this inclusion and not the checkbox, not the numbers or percentage. Yes, it's the holistic human aspect of this. So. Dr. Clark, thank you. Want to give you an opportunity if you have any final thoughts or last words that you would like to leave before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think again, in terms of like my new definition of inclusion, until the most marginalized feels included, the environment is not included. And I think with that in mind, organizations, programs, hospital systems need to start evaluating what voices they are listening to. Like, oh yeah, I totally feel included, but who's responding in that way? And I think if you just kind of move the curtain aside just a little bit, it will be quite obvious. It's not the individuals who really need those supportive structures, need to know that their perspectives are valued, need to know that they are supported in a way that they can thrive. And so I would say, the folks of the dominant ideology need to be gathered accordingly. And we have to continue to confront the inequities. We have to not only acknowledge the racist past of the United States and the racist history of medicine, but we have to start pulling people to the carpet, holding them accountable, and making them come face to face with these issues in a way that it cannot just be avoided.
Thank you so very much for your time and for your work in this space and all the spaces. And we are just grateful for your work with PAEA and that you are a part of us, a part of the organization and the impact that you have on students. So again, thank you so much, and look forward, as always, to talking with you again soon.
Thank you. My pleasure. Take care.